Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to another player profile, and we're going to take a look at another Saint. I had a look at Billings the other day and we'll look at Dan Hannebery today. It's one of the more interesting cases, probably in the AFL really, of his, decline in form. Normally we like to analyse when guys are going to peak and rise to their best football, but amazingly when Hannebery should be playing his best football, he's hit this awful slump of form over the last two seasons where, normally players from the age of 24 and your 100 plus games, your next 4 years or however many games it is, are normally your best. But his form in 2015 and 16, unbelievable. I'll take a look at that a bit closer in a sec. In the last two seasons, just gone south at a rapid rate. So much so, I think 2017 was poor, it was down, but last year was just a stinker. He had his injuries, he had different roles, and as we've seen, he's now got a different club. And the reason he is relevant is because he had an absolute stinker. 60.1 he averaged last year. Unbelievable for a bloke of Hannebery's ability. He did play the 14 games, but you can get him for about, I think he's about 326k. Obviously, that's really cheap for a guy who is capable of easily averaging three figures. 2015 and 16, he was the best, probably handful of midfielders in the comp, if not certainly the top 10, and certainly in SuperCoach averaging, right up there with the very best. Just tons, week in, week out, consistent, would find the ball, tackle hard, clearances all day long. Now, some of the numbers, looking through his averages over the journey, he always looked like a guy who was going to burst out at one point, and we saw him average in the 80s through 2010 to 2012, up to 95.3 in 2013, 101 he averaged in 2014, and it always promised to really go bang, and it certainly did. 2015, 114.5, 2016, 113.4. Excuse me, and they're the numbers I just want to sort of focus on. And we saw it drop to 97.3 in 2017. That is still, 16-point drop. That's big, but 97 is still a solid average in terms of the whole landscape of it. Poor for Hannebery, but it wasn't outrageous, where last year it's just hard to fathom. And he's looked like he's been injured. He's just lost that ability to cover the ground. His foot skills have dropped off. He's just not hurting teams anymore. And I had him in, I think, 2017. I think I started him one of the last couple of years, and it was just awful. He was just a mile off it. And I think even in 2017, after the Swans started really poorly, did they not? I think that was the year, and he struggled. Then he started to find form, and we thought, hang on, Hannebery's back. Poor start of the season, a bit slow, but he's back. And then he finished that year off really poorly. So, diving into the numbers, and it's really interesting. His stats, 2015 to 2016, I'll go through a few and then compare them. Disposals, 30 and 30.9. The last two seasons, 24.7 and then down to 18.7 last year. In terms of a breakup, contested ball, 18.4 and 17.8 in his heyday. Last year, 6.7, down from 9.8 in 2017. Tackles, 5.1 in both his top years. 5.2 in 2017, that didn't alter, but it was down to 2.5 last year, which really suggests an exclusion from the stoppage. And clearances, 4.5 and 4.7, 3.2 in 2017, or just 3, and down to 2.3 last year. And we have seen his metres gained and just general impact go way off, and they are dramatic drops in numbers. It's quite hard to believe. And we did see him, almost the Swans concede and say, Dan is cooked, unfortunately. We don't know what's wrong with him. I'm sure they did, but we in the public weren't told what is going on. He was playing different roles. He was run with players and just not being right involved at the stoppage as much as we've seen him in the past. And there was talk of groin injuries, shoulder injuries, that knee. You could have a reasonable theory that in 2016 grand final, when he hurt his knee, he's potentially never been the same. You know, there's a lot to read into it, and he just hurt a hamstring earlier this month, or last month, I should say. So, not an ideal start at your new club. What does it all mean? Because this has been pretty negative so far. It's just been a bit of a story of how Dan has dropped off. So, the real question is, yeah, we know he's dropped off. Yeah, whatever, shorty, he's gone down, okay. But can he come back up? Because that's the only relevant thing to us right now is, can he be a bargain at 326? And we know that at his best, he is elite. And I'm not a massive fan of mid-price players in the midfield. You guys know that. But the opportunity for us to get a player who has done that before, you know, and is still capable. It's a rare situation. Often you get a mid-pricer and it's a risk. They're a mid-pricer and you're hoping for a breakout. Or you're getting a guy who's come back from a real long-term injury and potentially their best football is behind them. Maybe that's the case with Hannebery. And sometimes you get those guys that we see value in them, but then in hindsight, they were just on the natural drop-off, coming the wrong side of the mountain. Where it could be the chance that his best football is quite possible because of his age bracket, his games played. That all suggests that he should be in his prime. And for whatever reason, which is most likely the body, which, you know, maybe falls into that other bracket that I mentioned before, where injuries are just going to ensure that he can't rediscover that top form. But the change of clubs, that's a change in doctors, you know, a different program, a freshen up, responsibility through the midfield. You know, he's going to get that opportunity. He's going to shoulder that midfield to an extent. The Saints have a few good midfielders. It's all worth thinking about because it's definitely an opportunity that if he can explode into what we did see once upon a time, then not only are we going to get a guy who is going to average big-time numbers, but he's potentially a keeper. Now, that's maybe getting a little bit too excited, but there's massive upside in Hannebery's potential. Where do I actually stand on him? What's my verdict? I'd really tread with caution, and I'm a Hannebery fan. You guys would know that if you've watched this for a reasonable length of time. I am a big fan of Dan Hannebery, but I'm pretty concerned, to be honest, and even more so with the hamstring injury the other week. And I just think too many times before we've been burnt with players who have injuries and we go, oh, if they can rediscover their best, have a look at it, you know. And they rarely do, particularly with injuries that have reoccurred. And Hannebery seems to have struggled to get rid of these niggles or whatever it is that's slowing him up. I don't think it's just a case of, you know, where he just had this one hamstring injury or something and it was really bad for half the season. Then he got back, and once he did, he was playing great, and now he's over it. This has been consistent over the last 2 seasons where he has not found his best form. He's had a pre-season, he's had time out of the game. It still hasn't come back. Now, if you want to be, you know, optimistic about the situation, you could mount a case that he could find his best. And when you look at the numbers and he's had 2 seasons over 110 plus, then that means we have to consider and you have to think about it. But at 320 odd K through the midfield, if that goes pear-shaped, then it just kills you. You know, we've seen a guy like O'Meara hurt people in the past. You know, he was about the same price. Similar sort of story, except he hadn't had the runs on the board. You know, it's just so difficult for those mid-price options to be good through the midfield because we have such lofty standards. You want guys to be averaging 106, 107 plus, really, by the time your midfield's complete. 110 plus if you're absolutely on fire. And that just means it's very difficult for them to be a keeper. And ideally, a mid-pricer, unless you want him to be a stepping stone, to a Dangerfield, or well, not this season because he's a forward as well, or, you know, a Mitchell or a Cripps or something like that. Where in the forward line, the back line, mid-pricers have the ability to become keepers, even if it's a D6 or an F6, because we have a lower acceptance when it comes to average. You know, we really just want something in the mid-90s. Maybe you can even accept a 93 or 94 by season's end. And I just think it's really tough for this Hannebery selection to go well. I think it puts a lot of pressure on early because you really need him to start well, because that's the thing with mid-prices. They might end up being a decent selection, but if they have a poor first 5 weeks, then you probably turf them anyway before they potentially really hurt you. So I would steer clear. If he were to dominate through the pre-season, and I'm sure we'll talk about him again, then he's going to put himself on our radar, no doubt. But I would find it very difficult for him to change my mind. As much as I love him, I love the way he plays footy. He's such a fantastic player. But these last 2 seasons is just way too concerning. There's been too much going on, too much doubt. He's had too long of a time for it to have not turned around already. And I know sometimes change of clubs can just go boom and things can really happen. But I think it's a massive risk. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. You know, I think at stages, even in this past month, thinking about Hannebery, I thought, yeah, I might actually. But, you know, really doing the research into the video and having a think about finding an actual verdict of where I stand, it became clearer that it would have to be a no. I think sometimes you're probably just better to, you know, go the other way in the midfield. You either find another 200k or you pocket 200k. You know, either go a rookie or a premium. So it's probably the way to go through the midfield, in my opinion. But as I said, let me know what you think. I'll be interested to hear that. And I hope you're travelling well. Hope you had a good New Year. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.